Alright, so Yu-Gi-Oh! Has always had its ups and downs, but high card prices and weak price support continue making it harder for players to stay in the game. Is Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG becoming too expensive for its own good? This is what today's discussion is going to be about, so if you're interested, of course, stay tuned. Like the video if you enjoy it, and do try and chime in with your thoughts because I would love to know what you think on the topic. Let's first establish why high card prices are actually problematic. Because in theory, if you're playing Yu-Gi-Oh! As a hobby, you are supposed to be able to enter a tournament with any deck you desire. Just choose a deck you like, and it can even be very cheap, and just play with it. Right? Unfortunately, that's not how it works. In this ever-changing meta environment, you have got to keep buying new decks that are usually made very expensive, including new staples, if you want to stay competitive. And that's just the reality of things. And that is the main reason why players are complaining, because it's just incredibly draining to have to continuously get adjusted to new formats, buy new decks, emphasis is on buy new decks all the time. Now let's just take a look at prices of meta decks historically. This tweet from Card Market is a great representation of this current format and just how much it costs to play one of the most competitive decks. They chose Malice, Mitsu, but as you can see, they did not account for every single card in the core, just the most expensive ones. And it is actually crazy if you take a look at Malice and you have to pay about $200 to play it, and you still have to pay extra for the new support. But let's table the discussion for just a quick second. We're gonna get back to this. I want to draw your attention to some budget decks first, just so we can establish that in the past we did have cheap metas, but they are few and far between. One of the most notable ones actually, is the Salamangreat meta. It was very, very cheap to invest in 3 structure decks, and you did have to buy Sunlight Wolf, but if you were smart and you bought them upon release, you paid a couple euros, which still felt bad for a rare, but then it shot up in price, which that's a whole other discussion. It was a cheap meta though. If you take a look at Branded, it was also fairly cheap, but you did have to invest in some support cards like Quem. What do both of these have in common? They're structure decks. And a lot of times, structure deck meta is going to be more inexpensive. It is not as expensive as investing into a side set meta deck, for example. And that is one of the main concerns of players. Because of power creep, there is always the need to upgrade. And when new support drops, you're going to be inclined to buy it. Now let's take a look at a pattern that's been forming in Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG for quite some time now. Malice was one of the most broken decks in the last format, and why it was as great as it was its ability to spam out a bunch of bodies and build incredible boards. There's much more that goes into the power of Malice, but let's keep it to just these couple of topics for the purpose of this discussion. You were able to achieve all of these bodies with the help of Link Decoder, a card that was banned on the most recent Forbidden and Limited list. Link Decoder is just a free body, and they decided to ban it because, oh, it's too broken for Malice to have additional bodies. What was it they printed in Alliance Insight? You guessed it, it was support cards that produce bodies. Let's take a look at Malice P March here. The most important part of the effect: during the main phase, if this card is in your hand, as a quick effect, you can banish another Malice card from your hand or grave. If you do, special summon this card. And what do Malice monsters do when they are banished? You pay either 300 or 900 and summon them back. Meaning that Malice P March here produces not one, but 2 bodies. And it is not the only support card which produces bodies. Let's take a look at the price. It is going to cost you about $66, and I don't even know why I say you, because I have to get the March hairs as well, which... yeah, it's gonna cost you about $66 to get a copy, and granted, you can wait for it to drop a little bit, but that's not gonna happen. It's a secret rare, a sought-after secret rare from the next core set, which is bound to change the meta completely. You have to play 3 copies naturally because it's a great card that's got other effects as well. So you have to invest into this. And how much did it cost you to get one Link Decoder? Now, with that, I want to draw your attention to another example of this because one lone example does not necessarily constitute a pattern. However, let's talk about Bonfire. And I very conveniently brought out the copy from Maze of Millennia, which is now about $2. And it just makes me cringe when I think about it because the card was that expensive. When it dropped, it literally sparked an outrage among players. I could only pull up the chart for a year back, but it was about $50, somewhere around the same time of last year. It received a reprint, or multiple reprints actually, and they printed 7th Tachyon, a consistency card, which is also funny enough, printed in Maze of the Master, the next Maze set. It is a secret rare. About $50, the same price that Bonfire was at last year. And what does it do? It boosts consistency of Raizu. And these examples do start to pile up. And it's not always that obvious. They do try and mask it a bit. For example, we all know that Arise Heart is just a retrained version of Trident. Trident was banned at that point. Arise Heart banished face down, and it got banned in due time. It happens, and it happens all the time. And since we are on the topic of ban lists, I want to draw your attention to another card. Now, I warn you, trigger warning, don't continue with this video if you get easily tilted. Fiendsmith's Tract is now about a $70 card. So a ban list happened, and Fiendsmith was not hit. Engraver was reprinted. Tract was not. Let's use me as an example. I got one tract for $5, another one for $15 because it sadly went up in price and I failed to notice that. And I was lucky enough to pull the third one. So in total, I spent about $20 for, or I guess $25 if you count the entry pack, which I pulled tract out of. So about $25 for 3 copies. One of them is $70. Now, look at this chart. It's actually crazy. And they know what they are doing. The same thing happened with so many cards in the past. Now, let's move on. Let's continue because I'm enraged now. Let's talk about other things. There's more Charmi Fuvalos. I pulled up the Rage of the Abyss version, of course. So let's check the price for the last year. Okay. So at its peak, Fuvalos was about 140. Well, this is on release, so let's check something else. About 130 or 85 when it studied a little bit. It was about 85 for a single copy, but yeah, it peaked at about 130. It is $29 now, which is fine. That's great. That's not what I'm complaining about. It received a couple reprints and I am so happy that it did because if it was up to me, I want everyone to have access to meta cards. However, how long did it take them to print this? It was actually not so bad. However, if you take a look at cards the likes of SP, for example, this is a great one because it took exactly a year for SP to get reprinted. Since its release, the reprint dropped in the next year's Megatins. And that does happen a lot. I understand that. And that is actually the least of my complaints from this video because I understand that if you pay more at the beginning, you're going to be able to play with the card for a prolonged period of time, like a year. And then the reprint drops and more people can get it, which is fine. However, when a card is that meta relevant, like SPM, Fuvalos and the likes, and any staple like access code, for example, do you remember how tough it was to get access code? Because it was just expensive and it didn't really feel like buying an access code because it's not going to come up as much, but you have to because it is going to come up sometimes. All in all, it just feels bad to have to go through this every single time a good card drops. You're essentially paying to play with cards earlier than other people. And that's all well and good. But some players, unfortunately, do get priced out because they cannot afford to pay for cards upon release. So sure, maybe you're among those people getting to play like 10 months ahead of time, which is fine for you, but that's not the case for everyone. And that's the sad reality we are living in. So far, we've talked about some issues, but I think the main concern is that no matter how much you pay, you are pretty much never going to break even once you go to an event, even if you go to multiples of them. I want to touch upon the problem of the cost of travel as well as the weak price support, because we'd be very happy if we got compensated for getting into Top Guide or perhaps even getting first place. First place is fine, like the pricing is okay. I'm not really complaining about that. But anything below first place, that entire bracket of people getting top 64 or top 32 is simply not getting enough to justify investing into this game. And that's the main problem, not to mention the cost of travel. So when you take all of this into consideration, we have to ask ourselves, how is this actually impacting our community? The things I've noticed is player burnout. People just feel completely burnt out by having to buy new cards all the time, especially when ban lists ban certain cards and print retrained versions of them that achieve pretty much a similar thing, but put a huge price tag on them. On the topic of those price tags, I think the secondary market is a big problem as well. People that speculate on the market, buy things out. Some cards obviously get short printed, which is also a problem. And at the very core of it, there's just the main issue of gatekeeping. So for my closing thoughts, I do think some steps are being made in the right direction. However, I still think a lot more could be done to improve the state of the game and the prices and everything that's going on right now. I would love to hear you guys' ideas on this topic. I simply wanted to bring some problems to light, and we can all have a respectful and cultured discussion about some solutions that could be implemented in the future. And I do want to know, what would make you feel more supported as a Yu-Gi-Oh player? And also, can Yu-Gi-Oh TCG really survive this price creep? So with that, I'm going to end today's video here. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.